The views expressed here are those of the authors and do not in any way represent the views of Sophia TV.
Assalamu alaikum, hello and welcome to another edition of Ladies First. I'm joined here by my wonderful panellists Fahmida, Sumaya, Nishat and myself. So let's just get straight into it, ladies. The question I have for you today is gender identity. Does this term have any place in our life? And do we as Muslims have a problem with keeping up with all the extra acronyms that are associated with gender identity? And do we also, just to add in a last point, do we feel that we must be PC? So do we have a problem with our Muslim identity and keeping up to date with gender identity issues? What are your thoughts?
I feel very confused at the moment because there's so much happening in that area. There's so many, gender identifications, people want to be called different things. They don't want to be male or female. They are male, but they want to be female. It's just all very confusing.
Which is fluid, gentlemen. Does anybody know all the terminologies, by the way?
Not all of them, but...
How many do you know? Let's just see, how many do we know? Brainstorm.
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual.
Pansexual, gender fluid, any more?
I think there's a special name for that as well. There is, I think it's called gender index or gender neutral.
Yes, so that's already 10. But do we know what they all mean? Do we feel that our scholars give us any advice about this?
No,
like how
of all the lectures I've listened to in the last 3 to 4 years, there has been one lecturer, one Sayyid, who's discussed the issue of homosexuality in the Muslim community, and that was really him breaking down some pretty rigid boundaries. He got a lot of backlash for that.
But do we think our scholars are even prepared? Are they confronted with these issues? Do they know what to say, for example?
I don't think because they're not involved probably in the West and over here when you're out and about. Like I have colleagues who are gay or lesbian, and I don't know how I should feel about that, or like I don't know if it's okay to be.
I'm going to interrupt you there, Sumaya. I think when we talk about lesbians and gays, I don't think there is a gender identification problem there. They are very much the gender they are. Yeah. It's just that what their preference is different. So I don't think we can categorize gays or lesbians as having problems with their gender identity. So I don't think lesbians or gays fall under the gender identity crisis.
But I've never heard a scholar talk about these issues.
No, yeah, you're right.
Well,
I haven't either.
Let's face it. Most of these scholars have spent half their lives in an institute. I mean, let's just be honest here. Some of them haven't stepped outside of their own front door to be able to...
Well, I hope they have.
We hope they have.
Some fresh air.
Well, this particular Sayyid who dealt with the issue of homosexuality in Muslim communities is very in touch with the community, very in touch with the youth. He's kind of young himself, born and raised in the West, but studied in the Middle East and lives there now. We need more of these scholars to come forward and say, look, we shouldn't have these issues in our community.
It's not just the duty of the scholars themselves. I think it is also the duty of the community leaders to know that now our generation are going through this or have exposed to such education, and therefore then encourage scholars to then talk about it from the pulpit.
But hold on, let's just backtrack a bit. So, female and male roles, who defines them in our faith? Who defines them? Who tells us what it means to be female and how we should conduct ourselves? And who defines how we should be as males?
We learn it through observation, first and foremost, in childhood, growing up.
Well, we have very stereotyped views of how women are in some parts of our community. Where does that come from?
There are, I think, guidance from our religion, which show, for example, when it comes to how you behave around people as a woman, for example, with the hijab concept and everything. I think there are guidances, but what it covers and how it is interpreted, I think, depends on the individual and their
surroundings.
Yeah.
What do you think, Sumaya?
I feel that you can respect an individual to make a certain choice. That if you, okay, for example, Caitlyn Jenner, who posed in Vanity Fair as a transgender, and she actually went through the whole process. So, I mean, you can respect her as an individual and a human being, but you don't necessarily have to agree with her choices, you know.
But that we're facing very real situations. We have people as young as 5. There was a boy, excuse me, who recently was undergoing an operation to become a female, and she knew that she was a woman from a very young age, and there are clinics now set up for children who are having problems with their gender identity. Do we find that problematic? Do we think that it's too early?
I find it very surprising that a 5-year-old would be allowed to make that decision.
Well, it's obviously done through counselling and talking, and I'm sure medications are given to prevent the onset of puberty. But do you think we don't address
disturbing? I think this trend is very disturbing. What does it say about the state of the society that we're living in?
I know that Iran is the largest, has the biggest number of gender operations happening.
Yeah, but that's bound up with so many other issues.
Yeah, after Thailand, yeah. I don't know what the age criteria is, and I know it's consisted of physicians and counselors and psychologists, and, but going down as young as 5, I think I
genuinely struggle with the idea of gender dysphoria. It is very difficult for me to understand how you can, if a 4-year-old boy comes to the mother and says, oh, God made a mistake and I was supposed to be a girl. I don't know how seriously you can take a 4-year-old, I mean, it's okay when it's all games and, role plays or whatever, as a kid exploring, but just taking this seriously and actually going with it, and, the kid will go to the extent where he will face these harassment in school, but would still be adamant on wearing, girl clothes or vice versa. I just don't understand.
But I feel, isn't that something we need to, okay, there are lots of things in happen in life that we're not comfortable with, or we don't have a reference for, but do we shy away from it? Or do we see what happens, like a lot of sciences when they started in the beginning, we didn't know where it was going to lead. And it was through research and then observations and mistakes that we thought, well, things change and conclusions were formed. Shouldn't this be the same type of situation?
But until we're faced with the issue.
But we are. We're dealing with situations where they want to have unisex toilets in schools.
Okay.
Because somebody's possibly going through a gender identity crisis. And what about their human rights? And how do this will affect us in one way or another. So what do we need to do?
We need to be educated ourselves before we can say anything to anybody that's going through the gender identity crisis. Another thing I wanted to add also is that from the Islamic perspective is that you have to make up a decision before you go either way. So for example, if you feel that you are a woman trapped in a man's body or a man trapped in a woman's body, you've got to decide what it is that you want to be. And then once you've decided, you've got to stick to it.
I'm definitely going to put that question to our scholar, inshallah, lady, because she's, inshallah, more educated to give us an Islamic verdict on it. But I'm just feeling, do we feel as women that we have to be a certain way with our gender? That what if we are, God forbid, opinionated and, want to...
a tomboy.
Well, I don't even know what is a tomboy. What does that mean? Because you
can
be
boyish things.
Well, but what is a boyish thing? I can change a tire. I can do it in how many minutes? I don't need. Then do I have a gender identity crisis?
Growing up, maybe I had a gender identity crisis because I loved everything that my brother liked doing. So I used to go out and play with him. I was involved in all sorts of outdoor sports. I did not play with Barbies. That was actually the stereotype for girls. I didn't even have one doll growing up as a child, and I would just pretty much hang out with my brother, and he's like 2 years younger than me, so we were similar age and we had similar interest. And
were your parents okay with that?
Yeah.
When did they start worrying? No, I'm just saying, is it when, like at 9, was it like, okay, the hijabs are now, you can't go and swing from a tree?
I don't think they have ever forced me or told me to not do this.
Or tone it down.
Or tone it down or anything. They have taught me the values, and that's how, the right values. So, so that's where I think I myself understood, okay, you know what, I set my own line, you know, so if I want to, for example, go into sport, okay, for me, is that okay? So if I wanted to, because I've done taekwondo as a kid, I took a few classes, right? But that was about it. That was my interest, and it just stayed for a few classes, and that was it. But that was my choice. But I was not really ever told that, you know, growing up as a kid, you can't take this as a career. Or
How
as a
do you
profession.
feel, Nishat? The same
I
for
think
you?
it would be Islamically wrong for a parent to tell a child that this is the only thing that they can do when they're allowed to do more. And I think it's very backward thinking to say that, oh, a girl cannot take sports like football or taekwondo, or a male-dominated, pursue a male-dominated career.
I think boundaries still need to be maintained. I think that a girl's body and her bones are much softer than a boy's.
Will that be a decision that she wants to make?
She
Everything
should,
has
and
a
the injury
risk.
can happen in anything.
Yeah, but
you know,
girls,
a boy can
I'm
injure
sorry,
themselves.
but no, girls have softer bones.
But
Maybe I'm taking a more traditional point of view, but I really believe that yes, there are some sports that are just, like for example, rugby. I wouldn't encourage my daughter to play rugby.
But if she's good at it, why wouldn't
no,
she?
because she's got a very small frame, and
she
I
would
would
be
worry.
with she would be with a weight range of girls that are like her.
And then
She's
all of a
hardly
sudden,
gonna
and she goes and plays away on the, and there's this, I don't know, a girl who's like 5'10".
But that is not. But that is assuming that all female or girly sports would not cause her injury.
Gymnastics can ballet. My goodness, have you seen the toes of ballerinas?
It depends on the type of sports and the activity and the intensity of the activity that
I
she
don't
engages.
think, for myself, I think it's, you know, when you have a child that is good at something or takes an interest, I would never say don't do that. With everything, there's a risk, but I'm not going to think, you know, oh my God, if she does boxing, that her nose is going to be displaced, and that will really affect her
I would
natural
worry
starters.
about something like that.
But
because
she would know because you would take them. Obviously, before you start anything, there's information, you look at it. But if that's something they want to do, well, sometimes you have to kind of learn the hard way, maybe.
How we're categorizing things to do with gender identity, I think there's different ways of doing it. For example, the way a person would think with their mind, all right? So for example, a tomboyish girl would be thinking, oh, I am good at sports and football or manly things. That's how you're thinking, and that's how you you know, engage in things. And then it's your heart as well, how you feel towards something. If your feelings are more like boys as well. And then the last, I think, would also be your preferences, your sexual preferences as well. All of these would be considered when you make a decision of what gender you want to be.
Roller derby has become really popular with girls, which is skating and racing, and then you have to knock, you know, the opposition down, which is a really big thing they have in America, etc. But for girls, they felt that, the girls who they interviewed, they felt it was a physical activity so they could come out of themselves. It was something different that had never been done, and something that they felt that they could, it didn't involve men, they could do it, they didn't have to worry about how they physically look like, and they could express themselves, let off some steam, and they didn't have another avenue to do that. But a lot of like people were saying it's not ladylike, or, you know, you're sweating.
Yeah.
You know,
Girls don't sweat.
Girls might touch each other like this. So, you know what people.
Or she
think.
might fall over and break a childbearing hip.
Exactly.
You know, and that would be a
was
disaster.
like,
That would be a disaster. Look, I wasn't
Hormone.
allowed to ride a bike as a girl because I'd be wearing trousers, and the way that you sit on the bike and the way that you mount it. So all of these things were factors in my parents' decision that said, no, she's not allowed to ride a bike. But things are now changing. However, I do find the whole issue of gender identity and all this confusion over gender very, very daunting. It makes me feel really confused, which is perhaps why I cling to feminine and masculine ideals. Where have they come from? I don't know. I don't mean blue for a boy and pink for a girl. Okay, my son, I'm teaching him how to cook. My daughter, I'm teaching her how to build a shelf. Okay, that's called giving children life skills. But in terms of this, I don't know. I think I'm a girl, or no, I think I'm this, or I'll wear a skirt today. No, I'm going to wear a prom dress tomorrow.
Well, if she might want to wear a kilt. What's wrong with that?
Well, they wear sarongs in my culture,
South Asian.
In South Asian culture. But you know, it wouldn't be a tutu.
We don't know.
God forbid.
Interesting discussion, ladies. Really enjoyed that. Now it's time for our one-to-one discussion with Masuma Jafar. And now on to my favourite part of the show, my one-to-one discussion with Masuma Jafar. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
A big question I had to ask you, something that's been in the news, gender identity. How do we as Muslims get our heads around this, and does it impact our lives, and how do we kind of make peace with it? For example, there's so many categories now I can't personally keep up, but what does Islam say about this?
This is actually not a new issue within Islam. There's actually a ruling that Imam Ali alayhi salam gave at his time when he was asked about a child that had been born neither male nor female. So it's not something that is, you know, new within Islam, that we do have rulings from the Aima. When there's actually a physical gender issue where it's, you know, the child is neither one or the other, then obviously the parents and the doctors will sit and decide where to go from that. The problem arises when the child is born of one sex and feels that they are another sex. Usually, I think when children are young, they're not aware of male and female. They're just children, and you know, if a child wants to, you know, if a girl wants to be a tomboy or a boy wants to do, you know, certain, like, play with dolls and things, I don't think it's something that the parents should worry about at a young age. I think, again, culturally, we're very much, boys have to be boys, girls have to be girls, and, you know, but children are children.
Right.
So there, you know, Islam doesn't, if you can, if there are tests done, psychological tests and things like that, where you honestly believe that you are in the wrong body, Islam doesn't have a problem for you to have that operation done.
Well, could you explain that? How the concept of how can you be in the wrong body? Why would God create? How does Islamically? How can we? I just find that a bit.
I think a lot of it's to do with hormones as well, the hormone levels and things. I mean, when my son was young, he went through a phase where he refused to drink the water from the tap because he said that they'd done some sort of something in science where the teacher was saying because most women are on the pill and they're taking, you know, lots of estrogen and progesterone and so forth. God. And then obviously when they're going to the bathroom, it's all coming out and then the water's, you know, cleaned up and refined and everything. And then, but those hormones are still in there. And he was like, oh my God, if I drink the water, I'm going to become a girl.
Right.
So, you know, the thing, I think as science has advanced, we are seeing lots of side effects to that as well. I mean, like, you know, with every pill that you take, there are side effects. So, yes, you know, with the advancement of science, we're you know, living longer, we're able to do so much more, but there's always side effects to that. And, you know, I mean, I don't know, I haven't researched into this, but I think, you know, maybe it's something that we've done or we're doing is maybe causing that hormone imbalance within.
So just to get this right in my own head, you're saying that Islam does cover issues such as if you feel that you're born in the wrong body and there's things that you could do for that. I want to go back to, what if you have children that don't necessarily fit a gender role, like we said, tomboys and stuff, but supposing there's a child that I know that he wanted to wear female clothes and he wanted to wear nail varnish. He was about 7 or 8 years old at the time. And it was a phase that he went through for 2 years, and the parents felt very uncomfortable with that, but that's what he felt he wanted to do. How do we deal with situations like that?
I think if he's, again, it's from an Islamic perspective, it is not encouraged to
So not just go through with it and just get it out his system if he feels that he needs to.
Exactly. Because,
or in public even.
I think Islam is about prevention rather than cure, sort of thing. So if you're sort of going to bring confusion within the child's mind, then that would be discouraged. When they're very, very young and they're playing with dolls, or that's not a big deal. But as they get older, then for them to actually dress up in girls' clothes would not be encouraged at all. I think what is not allowed in Islam is to cross-step dress. So you have to decide what gender you are, and then stick with that gender, and then live according to the rules of that gender. And obviously it's not just your decision, you have to go through the psychological assessments and so forth as well. It's not just one day I wake up and I say, okay, now I want to be a male, because life's just easier for men than it is for women. It doesn't work like that.
So how do we as a Muslim community deal with the pressures that this now brings? For example, we have the transgender community, and there's a push for there to be, say, unisex bathrooms, etc. How do we kind of keep up with all of this without, of course, oppressing anybody, but also keeping to our value system? How do we...
As with everything else that happens within the West, which Islam doesn't agree with, we have to actually explain to our children that these are God's laws. This is what God has said, with His wisdom. Obviously, we're very limited in what we can understand and see. And if you truly believe that there is a God and He is the all-wise, and He's created you and He wants the best for you, then why would you not follow His laws? But at the same time, do not be disrespectful, because your akhlaq is important as a Muslim. But we need to ensure that our children know that they cannot cross certain boundaries.
Okay, talking about crossing boundaries, in life you're faced with so many things. Supposing your child has a friend who is identifies with a particular group, or for example, I don't know, LBGTZ or whatever it is. There's so many letters, but anyway. For example, I was in a situation where at work, a colleague of mine is transgendered and wanted to get married, and they hadn't gone through the full operation yet. So when I politely declined, saying that I obviously respect you and stuff, but I just don't feel that it's appropriate for me to, because of what I'm representing physically and emotionally, and that caused a lot of problems. And we are faced with issues like that. How would you have approached that situation, and friendship groups, etc. How do we?
Again, I think it's the same sort of principle in, when we encourage our children to make friends with people who are, certain, like, for example, if a child is, a troublemaker, you would try to keep your child away from that, to making friends with that child. If you know a child has, as they grow older, drug problems or alcohol problems, things like that, you would tell your child, I don't want you to be friends with them, because you know that that's going to affect your child to a certain extent. You wouldn't, you would say, look, I don't have a problem with you interacting with this child and trying to guide them and trying to help them and be there for them, but you cannot be close friends with them, because you've got to realize that with friendship also comes advice, comes, some sort of, we tend to mirror our friends, and we tend to sort of take the advice from our friends, and all of these things are very dangerous. But can we
not just put that to one side, as in who they are is who they are, and not kind of, that's their decision, not ours? Agreed. But we can still have
you can still have a relationship in like they're your colleagues, they're your peers, they're your, you know, classmates. But to be close to someone and to have a close friendship with someone, I think who they are plays a huge part of that, because, you know, you're not friends with, you know, you're friends with that whole person, with everything that they stand for and everything that they value as well.
But what if you've grown up with that person and you've known that person for a long time, or even a family member? What do you do then?
Again, it's the same sort of principle. If
you can't, I mean, family ties, we can't really break. How is that going to?
Okay, so you would keep, you know, family relationships as much as is possible, but that you wouldn't be so close to that person that that person can affect you, or you wouldn't go to that person for advice, because you know that their moral stands, their values are totally different to yours.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that, because it's a tricky one.
Yes.
And then, do you think that, is there a place for these type of people? Because I don't, sorry, I use the term these type of people. I'm just trying to think of what I would say. There's a growing phenomena, well, I don't know if it's always been there, but there's lots of Muslim groups now who are in subcategories, whatever they want to label themselves with. How do we come to terms with that? Do we acknowledge that this happens in the Muslim community? Is it their problem, not our kind of problem?
I have a problem with a Muslim calling himself or herself a Muslim, and then openly claiming to be something that God has, you know, said that you cannot be. So, you know, you can't match the two together. And I feel when you do that, it is my duty to say, no, that is wrong. I'm not judging you as a person. What I'm saying is you can't be a Muslim and be this as well, because God has said you can't. I remember actually listening to this this priest on the radio when they were talking about homosexuality, and he was saying that you know, because his relationship with God was so strong as he was growing up, and he had these homosexual feelings, he never actually acted on them because he knew that that was against what God's wishes were. But he used to pray to God to give him the strength not to act on them. And he felt that those prayers helped him. And then he said, he was actually saying as he grew older, he got to a stage where he wanted a relationship, but he only found the same sex appealing. And again, he prayed to God to give him, you know, some sort of guidance, something where he, you know, he felt. And he said he met a wonderful woman who he became very, very close friends with. And he says, yes, he doesn't have the same sort of sexual desires towards her as he would maybe to the same sex, but he felt he could have a life with her, and he's, you know, she's his best friend, and they got married and they had children, and she knows exactly how he feels. But at the same time, she knows that he would never act on those because of his love for God, and because of his understanding of God, and because he knows that this is something that God has, you know, told him not to do. And I thought it was so beautifully put that, you know, and it's the same, I suppose, you know, I'm not saying that the feelings aren't there, I'm not saying that, but, you know, if you know that God has said this is wrong, then you would try your most not to do it. You wouldn't sit there and say, well, I don't care what God said, this is what I am, and I'm still claiming to be a Muslim. It doesn't make sense.
SubhanAllah, so much to think about there. There's a lot. I mean, we're coming to terms with a lot of the things that are coming up in society as well. I hope you've enjoyed this segment as much as I have. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.